So when we asked ourselves who can show us success from away and who's doing something, who can set a precedence that we can find inspiration, who can we pin on our Pinterest boards, a bit of a small world introduction from a local architect in Biddeford by way of DC, we came across Martin Ditto. Martin is building urban housing in DC and now beyond. Martin is growing a development business called Ditto Residential, which focuses on design-driven decision-making. He's here to tell us about the successes and the genesis of his business. Welcome. Thank you, Martin.
Okay, is this working?
Yep.
Good. All right. I'm not going to use a lectern if that's okay. Get a little bored standing behind them. But it's great to be here today. I've not been to Portland before. My girlfriend is from here, so it's fun to see her hometown and understand kind of what makes Portland tick. We actually did a big study on kind of the southeast and northeast United States to see where we would expand our company. And came up with about 6 cities, all up and down the eastern seaboard, and Portland, Maine. So it's interesting because these cities have rapid growth, have the type of consumer and renter/buyer that we're interested in, who's design-driven, interested in innovation, highly educated, all of the things that we look for our product. So it was exciting to see Portland make that list just purely based on statistics. So I'm excited to be here, a little bit nervous. I talk a lot about innovation and design. That's how we're known in DC. But today I'm going to share a little more of my personal story and kind of how I got to where I am, not just from a business perspective, but from a personal perspective, from a health and wellness perspective, and how that approach or how that is affecting my company, and why I'm excited about that. Again, my name is Martin Ditto. I'm the CEO of Ditto Residential. We're about 11 years old. Been in multifamily my entire life, so we're going to talk about how the company got started, where we are today, where we're going. And it's relevant today because I'm in the multifamily space and because I've never been happy with status quo my entire life. Always trying to make changes to things, always trying to improve things. And that is sometimes a good thing in business and often a bad thing in business, but that's something you learn along the way. So as I was preparing for today, there were 2 structures. One idea is to talk to you guys about the company. How had we gotten started? What had we dealt with in terms of issues, in terms of obstacles, and kind of what the evolution of the company looks like. And then there's a personal story, how I dealt with issues of wellness and mental health in my background, and how that has brought me here today, and then how that affects our trajectory going forward. And what's exciting for me is that over the last year, it's become very clear to me that I can't continue to go on a path in real estate that is purely profit-driven, purely just about design, and that is divorced from my own personal journey around mental health and wellness, around making the world a healthier place and building places that are actually helpful and not just static in terms of how they affect the world. And so this is the story that I'm going to share with you today. But it all started, or a lot of this started, around 2008, just before the financial crisis. I was working at the sexiest, coolest development company in DC. They were at the meteoric rise. They actually were funded by Lehman Brothers. So for the bankers in the room, what that means by when I say funded, I don't mean debt or equity. I mean all of their debt, all of their equity, all of their mezz, and all of their GP capital. GP capital is the capital that a developer puts in on their own. So for the entire capital stack to be funded by one capital provider, it doesn't make any sense. And the fact that Lehman was doing that with both their fund money and commingled funds was wild, and it should have been obvious to everyone that this was a recipe for disaster, which it was. So I had a very interesting boss. His name was Will. He was an MIT real estate graduate, and loved to argue, loved to debate. And so every morning I would come into his office and we would debate. We would talk about the company, talk about where things were going, and oftentimes it would end up being this conversation about what's wrong with the company, because the company was run by these 2 fairly egomaniacal people who initially loved each other but eventually hated each other. And they were both owners of the company equally, and there was no easy way to kick one of them out because they both wanted to run the company. So imagine as a young developer, kind of in the middle of that, just kind of wading through that. But it was an amazing team. I'd worked with a very cool, a very, very good family-oriented company prior to Monument. And so being at Monument was interesting because for the first time I was around really young, really bright, really energetic, fun people. We went to happy hour, put everything on the Lehman credit card. It was fantastic. And literally everything. But it was just the way it was done. But one morning I walked into Will's office and expecting to have the same conversation over coffee as Will sat there and talked about the ills of the company. And midway into our conversation, Will looked at me and he goes, "You know, Martin, you either need to quit or I'm going to fire you." And that was not what I was expecting. Because Will was my friend. Actually, he still is my friend today. And it's one of those things you learn about friendship is that sometimes friends tell you what you need to hear but maybe don't want to hear. And Will wasn't saying, "I'm firing you now." He's saying, "You're not happy here. Like, you've explained to me why this company makes you uncomfortable physically, emotionally, in all of these ways. And that's true for me too, but I'm your boss and I'm not going to leave." He actually loves the bullshit. So I, at this time in my career, was going through a lot personally, from a relationship ending to just incredible stress on the job because I didn't have the support I needed, but threw myself into the job so that I could be as successful as I possibly could be. And as a result, was suffering from all kinds of psychosomatic ills and pains. I mean, everything from my feet hurting, plantar fasciitis, to like constant esophageal issues, to not sleeping, everything you can imagine that stress induces. And I guess it wasn't really obvious to me that it was the job, but I was really becoming unhappy. And so Will's conversation that morning and then me leaving the company really began my professional journey, leaving what was by far the coolest company in DC from a real estate perspective, setting off on a mission to do not quite sure what. I just knew that I had to leave. And then it also started my personal mental health and wellness journey because I was leaving a place that didn't make me healthy, fairly confident that I needed to find a place that did. And so that rolled into a move to Nashville to start a restaurant with a close friend, this idea that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, to be on my own, to create something that made me proud, but also made me happy. I don't know if anyone in here has ever started a restaurant, but they're not easy. My partner and I split very quickly. I joke because it's funny, but it's actually true, that he never hugged his dad before. So I think that's a fairly important requirement for a business partner, the ability to hug their father. But upon ending that, and some friends convinced me to come back to DC, I really had no choice. Like I needed to continue on this journey that had started when I was at Bozzuto, the company prior to Monument, saying like, I want to do something different in the world. I want to create something that makes me proud, that is along the lines of these two, one conservative company, one fairly forward-thinking company, one well-run, one not well-run. How can we merge those things? How can we create something special that actually is a place that I want to work and that people like me want to work? And so that was what I did. So around January 2009, we started a company called at the time Venture 2 LLC, only because the restaurant was Venture 1, this became Venture 2, waiting for a good name, which eventually became Ditto Residential. So we started flipping houses. That was what I knew. I knew construction, I knew development, I knew some finance. I had math and economics background, but I knew enough to start buying houses and fixing them up and selling them. In the first 3 years, we did 30 projects. It was a crazy time. And at the beginning of starting a business, as many people in this room know, you wear every single hat. Whether that's finance, accounting, whether that's cleaning up the office, or of course, sales. Actually, I never did sales. I mean, you do sales. Just as an executive, you do sales. But yeah, right. And then I guess my most interesting job was a garbage man, because when you're renovating houses in DC, one of the biggest initial expenses is your trash. And so in order to not pay $500 per dumpster to take to the dump, I would go rent a U-Haul truck, and we would pull it up to the site, fill it up. I would drive on my own to the DC dump and dump it all out because that would save me $400. But I remember one day I was a house on Myrtle Street in DC, and one of our guys threw like last piece of trash through this sewage P-trap into the truck, hit the lip of the truck, and a bunch of shit hit me in the face.
Awesome.
And that was my last trash run. We began using dumpsters after that. But we've come a long way. It's still disgusting to think about, if you're wondering. We've come a long way, and our story is in DC that we're known for great design, we're known for innovation, we're known for being a place that young people want to work, where they don't feel like they get the interest of real estate design and development, but also the creativity of a young and aspiring company. And over the course of the last 11 years, have built an amazing team, a team that I'm very proud of problem solvers who really love the work that we do. And we've been able to cultivate, in a very short time, two of the strongest brands in Washington. One brand being a high-end condo brand that does fairly modern condos, which I can show you at the end. Not much for slides. And the other is a co-living brand. Does anyone know what co-living? Everyone know what co-living is? Co-living, yep. Not much.
That's what you're here to tell us.
Right, co-living. So co-living is a fairly new term in real estate development, but it's not a fairly new concept. I mean, the idea is very easy to explain. When people get out of college and they go live in a group house, right, that's co-living. And so co-living, as it's explained today, is multi-family group houses. So group houses stacked on top of each other, or student housing that is in a multi-family complex, but not for students, for kind of post-baccalaureate, post-graduation. So we realized at some point that just building houses wasn't enough, that I wanted something kind of more, and ventured into the multifamily space. And the first multifamily building was what we got into co-living. It was not that we set out to say, hey, listen, let's turn residential real estate on its head, because that's not an easy thing to do. But it was that we found a project that had more square footage than you could sell as a condo, and had more square footage than you could rent as an apartment, just based on the neighborhood. And so hired an architect and said, hey, listen, we've never done this before, but let's build units inside units. Let's just build micro units, right? But surround like a common area. And this was not really being done anywhere else that we knew about. And that evidenced by the fact that it was almost impossible to get financed. Yeah. So,
Lehman
but
was gone.
What's that?
Lehman wasn't around.
Lehman wasn't around, no. But we felt confident in it because even at a fairly significant discount to what was market for a room, we could rent these rooms and make money. So we went to multiple banks, tried to get financing. Actually, one of the funny stories of my entire career was when we were trying to get our bank, Capital Bank, to approve this loan, and we were standing back in the alley, and I was like, going on and on about the neighborhood and how good it was and everything else. And all of a sudden I hear this, freeze! And this gentleman sprints down the alley, and then a cop holding a gun like a gat is running after him. And I'm there with my banker and someone on the board of directors, and I'm like, this is unbelievable. Nothing worse could happen. Now, luckily, Jerome Bailey was a board member who'd done a lot of work in this neighborhood, so we got it financed. And a ton of work later, Oslo was a huge success. And we've continued the building of Oslos, even as the co-living community has grown nationwide. We've stayed in DC. We're the largest operator here in DC. And I guess what it says about us, that we got into this and really enjoyed it and then built more, was that we love the idea of creating a brand and a culture and a product. Right? So that became central to who we are. How can we be better, more interesting, more valuable because of the product and the brand and the culture, all of those things wrapped up into one, so that there's a value to who we are as an organization, not just to the project by project things. So one of the interesting things is when I ask people anecdotally, do you live, for instance, who in here lives in an apartment building? So fairly low percentage. So if I was in DC, that would be like 80%, 70%. And if I were to ask those people how many of them actually are good friends with people who live in the building with them, most of them are not. In fact, I have one friend who lives in New York who is in a high-rise building in Brooklyn, and he knows 0 people on his hall and almost no one in his building, but every weekend he drives out 4 hours to a weekend resort where he lives on a cul-de-sac, and he knows 100% of the 13 people in that cul-de-sac. So we see people living in these places where they really don't have the community that we might expect or might want in order to build a really healthy place for us to live. So as we're looking around our city, our nation, and what's going on in housing, we're building a future that's not aligned with our values. I feel like housing right now is not available for many people at certain levels of socioeconomics. It's not affordable, it's not diverse. And we're building communities where the only thing people have in common is their socioeconomic class, and we're using zoning as a way to maintain that. In DC, which is, DC is 98% Democratic, surprise. And yet, when we have potential development sites on major corridors right next to metro, next to mass transit, the community comes out in overwhelming opposition to adding density to those sites. So the same people that are saying that they want people to have affordable housing and to have a good quality of life, they're saying that, but they're not voting that, right? And we're not even talking about affordable housing. They don't want any housing. They want nothing to change. They want the way that they have it in their world to not change at all. And so what does this mean? Where are we going? And what does it look like? So this is the part where we're not sure. So we're literally entering into this investigative period of our company. We're continuing to do our developments, but also now building a new model for what we want in real estate, a new model for what we think the world needs. And the things that we know it needs to be is it needs to be aligned with our goals. It needs to be commercially viable. And people need to be willing to pay some premium. It doesn't have to be a 10 or 15% premium. People need to be able to say, like, I choose this product over this other product. And this is kind of at the crux of what we're trying to create. So through ULI, I've been meeting with a number of different large landowners, large tract landowners, people who own large apartment complexes and people who own large retail. The retailers are really in a bad place because you have tens of thousands of retail developments all over the country that will need to be redeveloped over the next 10 to 20 years. And just building, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, a new branded town center was very popular, right? But the problem is everyone in here has been to a town center, and each new town center doesn't look any different than the last town center. So these guys really are in need of a product that will drive demand. So we're focused on experience, on community, and what are the basic human needs? What are the things that people want, even if they don't exactly know that they want it, that can improve their lives? And so we know that the amenity war, interior design, all of these things are basically, they change with the winds of time. But the need for human connection and healthy relationships is more important than ever. I mean, you cannot open a newspaper today, it's impossible, without reading about loneliness. You can't open a periodical with economists reading about like the real problems in the world that are really not as structural. They're not about like necessarily where you live, but how you live. That's young. There's young men who are playing video games, multiple hours a day, to old people who are stuck in their houses and unable to have community. It's at every sector of every age group, every sector of economics. And so we know that we need connection. We know that we need healthy relationships. We know what the world needs. We're trying to figure out exactly how to deliver that. And so the goal now that we've set out to do is to build a residential real estate lifestyle brand focused on wellness and healthy communities. We're defining that not just based on wellness, but based on this idea of what we want and what we know that the world needs, so that people living in these communities can literally find themselves amongst other people who want a healthy lifestyle. And so the number one, that you create community, it's interesting, people always ask, how are you going to do this? Is it going to be you're going to have spas, or you're going to have massage, whatever? the way you create communities with people, you could have, again, my friend goes to this cul-de-sac 4 hours out of New York City, not because there's an amazing spa there, but because there's 13 people on the cul-de-sac that all want the same thing that weekend. They want their kids and their friends to come and enjoy community, to cook together, to enjoy each other's company. And there's no common area. So we know that this can be created with almost no infrastructure, right? So it's about creating the value and creating that organization where we can attract the people who are interested. So to a lot of people, this sounds fanciful. It sounds idealistic. How's this going to work? People don't really vote with their feet. No one's going to move. How do you accomplish such a vision? And so those are good questions. And we've been grappling with that for a long time. In fact, about 10 years ago, someone that I look up to had a similar problem. Steve Jobs wanted to create, he needed to stop relying on Best Buy and Radio Shack to sell his product. They didn't represent him well. They did not represent the product. They didn't do good customer service, good warranty, any of those things. So he said, well, the only way we can do that is if we literally interact face-to-face in our own stores. And so he interviewed the best and the brightest in the entire world, all the consulting firms you've ever heard of, including IDEO and others, McKinsey, Bain, all of them. And he ultimately chose a small firm in San Francisco called 8 Inc. And so when I was, in October this year, I was at a conference and I met the president of 8 Inc. and I told him my audacious, idealistic goal of building this brand that I would then roll out to partners all over the country that was in the vein of this common belief that we need to build a healthier world. And he was incredibly excited. I mean, 8 Inc. takes on very few clients, and everyone's a partner. And so we've been working with them. We're just months away from delivering what will be the architecture of what we're building. And I really believe they're the most amazing designers I've ever worked with, and it's an honor, honestly, to work with them. So we believe the solution is health and community focused. We believe that we need to have community in the places that we live in order to be healthy. We need to deal with the social and somatic illnesses of the world. I mean, so many illnesses are preventable. Loneliness, anger, isolation. These are all things that can be solved through a human-focused pattern of development. I was actually, I'm running out of time, but quick story. I watched it for my YPO group. The former Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces in NATO came and spoke, and I thought he was going to talk about the good things and the bad things in the world, but all he talked about was the scare tactics, everything bad in the world. And the only thing he said that was going good in the world, I asked him, I said, well, you said you were going to talk about the good and the bad, but then you only talked about the bad. I said, well, what's the good? And he holds his phone up. He goes, this is the good thing. And it's funny because I thought that was probably the worst part of anything that he said, because we know about social media. We know what it's doing to us. I mean, not just to kids, but to all of us. We know that it's not a healthy thing. So the future of the world needs to take culture and wellness into account. We must do more than provide simply sheltering communities. And we understand the desperate need for community in our culture and understand that community lives in 3D spaces. We need to create spaces, not just residential, retail, commercial, all of these other congregations like the Third Place, these places that we can go outside of our home where we don't have to spend money on a beer to really enjoy and to be healthy in our lives. So our goal, therefore, is to decommodify real estate, to create healthy communities that improve the lives of residents around us. And we want people to choose our properties based on their shared values of what a healthy world looks like. While I do feel confident in our success, we also know that's not going to be easy. People in the world are skeptical, and people in this room are skeptical. We know that. I've done this talk, and I've heard the skeptics ask questions. Questions around authenticity. Why would a for-profit developer have any interest outside of profit? Very few developers we know are in the mission-driven world. And how do you ensure that the organization that we build remains authentic? Because we see startups all the time in Silicon Valley start off as totally authentic, and then they get bought or they go public, and then they're purely profit-driven. And this happens all the time. So while we understand this might not be for everyone, and that our dreams may be audacious, so many other people already share this dream. We see this in the world of all kinds of businesses, from Patagonia to Tom's Shoes, and all of these social impact organizations that are being started all over the country, here in Maine, in Washington, D.C., all over the South, all over the West Coast. And all of them with this idea in mind that we want to improve the health and wellness of like-minded people. So for a while, for the past year, it's becoming crystallized for me that my passion in life around health and wellness is to help other people find their passion, to help other people really get healthy and to speak their soul's purpose by really getting in touch with themselves. And so by creating communities of health-conscious people and community-conscious people, it's where my plan is to invest the next chapter of my professional life. And I know we'll be successful because we all know what's missing in the world today. Everyone in this room, like different political persuasions, different hobbies, all kinds of different things, but we know we're missing this community. We know we're missing all of these basic elements that used to create healthy communities that have left as the world has become entirely commercialized. What makes it hard is that we won't be successful by winning the amenity or design war. We're building a beautiful vision for the future, and we have a head start. There are other companies that are building real estate branded-based approaches, but they're doing it purely based on economics and purely based on making money. And the other thing is that we're starved for authenticity. We hear this in the retail world all the time. Everything's about authentic. Cammie and I were walking down the street today, and there were 7 different restaurants that said authentic Mexican food, authentic this, authentic that. Well, I mean, eventually the word loses its meaning. And when a word loses its meaning, you've got to prove it by not saying it. You've got to prove it by living it. And so we can't promise the meteoric rise of a company or this vision that other people may undertake. But I know that project by project will be successful because we know that this is what the world needs. We know that eventually more authenticity from developers and from spaces is inevitable. So what I need for people to do who are interested in this is to think about what you value in your life and how your community does and doesn't provide that, and to demand from people, from whether that's private sector businesses, whether that's governments, whether that's organizations like MEREDA, to help make these changes that we need, to help create a healthier world. And if you agree that housing developments today aren't contributing to the lives of residents and improving communities, then you're on our team. Right? It's not a political thing, right? That's what I love about it. So many companies that we compete with are going super high-end, or they're going for political persuasion. There's a hotel chain in DC that's super politically active. I love the woman who runs it. She's super wealthy. I agree in many ways with her vision, but the problem is she's creating a hotel that's just for Democrats. And, well, I mean, yeah, the Eaton Hotel. And it's a wonderful hotel, but that doesn't cross. I mean, that's not creating the kind of community that I want to create. Not to say that it's not a absolutely good goal for her. But if you agree with housing developments aren't contributing to lives, then you're on our team. And if you're excited about what you're building, then get involved. Get involved in wellness-based communities. They're all over the country now, and they're mostly suburban because it's easier to do that. But get involved in your own communities in increasing the ranks. To build places that are healthier than what we have today. And remember that this movement is not new, right? Communities used to be much more communal than they are today. I mean, you can go back thousands of years to Chinese times or to any single civilization in history, and they are far more communal than the United States is today. The way that we build, our patterns, our garage doors, all of these things help create boundaries. And what we need to do is to come together. And so as we develop this brand that really understands how to create value in wellness and health and real estate brands, we're excited to go out to the community and find partners who want to do this all over the country. And I encourage all of you, if you don't agree with this idea that we need wellness-based communities, find out what is missing in your community, whether that's wellness or something else, and help to add that. Be part of the solution that you want to create. And if you're interested in what we're doing, we obviously love to talk about that as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Good job.
Thanks.